What is your, I'm lucky to be alive story? Car crash. I was passenger in a Jeep that completely smashed into the ground upside down. I'm short, so I was low in the seat. If I wasn't wearing my belt, I would have been dead. Story 2. My family moved a lot when I was young because my dad was a very successful chemist. He was headhunted a lot, hence why we moved. We ended up living in a shady part of Trenton, New Jersey. It was the best we could get on short notice. For context, I am mixed, but look white. My brother and I were walking to school one morning, and I happened to be looking down the cross streets because we were new. I heard someone yell, "What you looking at, cracker?" followed by gunshots. We ran all the way to school that morning, and I learned to keep my head down. Story 3. Many moons ago, I was living overseas with the Air Force. One weekend in March, my friends and I decided to go get a hotel and visit one of the foreign cities. We booked a hotel, booked tours, etc. Friday rolls around and I overslept, so we didn't go. My disgruntled friends decided to cancel the trip altogether because it was a hell of a drive getting to the hotel and wasn't worth it to go just for 2 nights when leaving so late. That Friday happened to be March 11th, 2011, and the country happened to be Japan. For those uninitiated, that was the date the massive earthquake and ensuing tsunami hit. The city we were going to visit was Sendai. That city ended up getting destroyed by the tsunami. The hotel we were going to stay in was wiped away. That could have been us, all because we overslept. I still have the confirmation email of the hotel. Story 4. I got E. coli when I was 2 and ended up spending 2 weeks in the hospital and stopped breathing multiple times. It's a miracle that I'm alive today. Story 5. I've got 2 and I'll make it short. At 18, on the way home from snowboarding in Vegas, I went to sleep with a seatbelt and the driver lost control. I got ejected out the back window. I came out with the least amount of injuries out of 4 people in the car. Car landed about a car length from me. I'm 36 now, but last I had a heart attack. Called 911 for emergency services to rush me to a hospital. They said they had to revive 4 times on the way to the hospital. On the table at the hospital, they had to revive 3 more times while they worked on me. They called my heart attack a widowmaker. Story 6. Anaphylactic shock. Drank almond milk at 6. My face and neck puffed up. I have faint but vivid snapshots of the memories. Staring at the door while my mom fumbled for keys. At the doctor's office in my dad's arms waiting for help. 2 fire trucks and an ambulance rushing down the street. Madagascar on the TV. I tried to talk, but nobody would hear. Driving in the ambulance. Walking out of the hospital that night. Story 7. Moron decided to overtake the bus when I was oncoming on the other lane. He had continuous lines, so can't overtake. I suddenly developed nerves of steel and gently and calmly turned the wheel to the patch of grass that became the road shoulder. Dumbass must have hit the brakes hard because his car was shaking the rear end. I've read that's what happens to FWD cars when you brake hard. He blazed past me and went about his stupid business. Luckily, the biker behind me did the same, or he'd get clipped. My passengers were screaming and almost crying, and when the commotion stopped, I came back to myself and started shaking a lot, and had the urge to cry, but held it. I wanted to ask if the biker was okay, but I couldn't speak. Drove like 3 kilometers like this before I snapped out of it. I never want to be put to test like this again. Youngsters may think it's cool to prove yourself a good driver, but it's not. It sucks. Thank God nothing like this ever happened again. Story 8. About 15 years ago, I went on a date with my best friend's roommate. We found we didn't have a whole lot in common, so we left it at that. I've always been a bit set in my ways, and there were some lifestyle changes I just wasn't going to change to meet her perceptions of an ideal guy. To be honest, she came off as a bit too clingy and demanding. About a week later, she went on a date with another guy, and very quickly, they were exclusive. A couple months after that, they have a falling out, and she's devastated. He goes over to her place to get his things, and she had her brother and one of his friends there waiting. They beat him up pretty good, then threw him from the 4th floor balcony. He did survive, but I just think about how close I could have been to being in his shoes. Story 9. I blacked out driving and hit a telephone pole. It was a small pole next to the train tracks. It fell over and the power line attached to it detached. My Jeep rolled over. I was trapped in my car for an hour until they could turn the power off to get to me. If my Jeep would have caught fire, I would have been barbecued. Story 10. A guy bombed onto my head while I was swimming underwater in the shallow end of a pool on purpose because he thought it'd be funny, and my head smashed into the floor. Code my instantly, and apparently I was underwater for a few minutes before my dad realized and dived in for me, pulled me out, and performed CPR. My dad promptly kicked the living schmidt out of the guy, and no one came to his aid because he'd almost just killed a 9-year-old. Story 11. Growing up, our backyard was about 2 acres. Then there was a thin slice of woods and railroad tracks. I was out near the thin slice of woods with our family dog and a BB gun. It had been raining like all the prior week and was still a little wet here and there. My dog walked over what I thought was just some mud. I decided to hop up and into it for fun. I jumped up and came down and kept right on going till about my waist. As I scrabbled for solid ground, I hit a big ass red ant nest. I'm struggling to get out. and also being bit up badly by a lot of ants. I hollered for my mom, but she couldn't hear me, so I ended up shooting at the house. It was a BB gun. My mom comes busting out of the side door, furious, and then hears me. She comes running over to help, and she couldn't pull me out. Her foot ended up going in the mud to her knee, but she managed to pull her leg out. She tells me she's going to get help and runs off and calls 911. Like 10 minutes later, firefighters show up. My mom was trying to help me the whole time, keep me calm, and get the ants off of me. So these firefighters come running up, and one grabs one side of me and the other grabs the other. By this point in time, most of the ants were hit away by my mom and me. These two guys heave up, and I come up to almost my knees, and then they couldn't pull anymore. As they let up pressure, I'm sucked back down, but this time to my chest. I kind of freak out, and they try to pull me up again, this time just to my waist. The same thing happens. I get sucked back down, this time to my neck. My arms are very awkwardly up on the air. One firefighter's laying on his stomach, and his arms are under my armpits at this point, and I just remember him saying he wasn't letting go. "I won't let you go. I got you." He tried to pull a little, and I went up a little and down more. Pretty much just my face and hands were above the mud. The firefighter holding me is hollering for a mask. I assumed because they thought I was going to go under. I damn sure thought I was dead. The other firefighter that was helping originally ran over and yelled to put this around me. I see a rope come into view, and then it gets out under my arms and around me. They had put it around a tree, like a pulley, and then 3 of them pulled while the first one stayed with me. It took almost a half hour to pull me out all the way. I lost my shoes, my shorts, my boxers, and anything I had in my pockets. It hurt. At some points felt like my torso was being ripped from my bottom half. I got bit a few hundred times by ants and got sick from that as well. Didn't go near that area again. Story 12. My house got broken into, and the guy was hiding in my house when I got home. I was about to open the door to my room and got a funny feeling not to do it. When the cops showed up and opened the door, he fired immediately at the cops. Luckily, he missed. It always makes me wonder if I'd be alive if I opened the door. Story 13. As a 19-YO, I was speeding, not wearing a seatbelt, veered off the road, and was ejected through the windshield. I was life-flighted to the hospital where I remained in a coma for a few weeks, followed by weeks of inpatient therapy. Story 14. In the first Gulf War, I witnessed the USS Princeton and Tripoli both hit a mine within the same 5-hour period, and the shockwaves were incredible. So, to set the scene, this was within 10 days of the above incidents, which luckily were fatalities-free. I was on an RN destroyer. Our mess was at the back of the ship, above the propellers, and also below the waterline. It was roughly 02:30 and had just come off watch, and given the circumstances, you are running off adrenaline, and it's difficult to switch off enough to sleep straight away. I was lying in my bunk and heard a really loud impact, metal on metal, and knew instantly what it was. A mine bounced off the bow, was pushed back against the side of the ship, and came off a third time, getting closer to us. There was no life flashing through your mind. Tried to scream out, but couldn't, and was totally frozen. When nothing happened and I came around, I jumped down off my rack, and as we were wearing white multi-layer fire protection overalls, always sleep-dressed and boots on, I realized that I and a couple of the other guys had literally pissed ourselves. The mine was picked up by a Yank minesweeper, which had a really nasty propeller crease in it. It was a dud. Story 15. Working graveyard shift on the rigs. Driving back to camp at 7 a.m. pitch black and in a whiteout blizzard, got hit by a double-loaded semi hauling gravel. Airbag didn't deploy. Broken jaw, orbital bone, nose, clavicle, several ribs, couple metacarpals, and fractured sternum. Wound up unconscious in a snowdrift. Pulled out of wreck by a couple local First Nations boys who probably saved my life. Hospitalized for weeks and never went back to the rigs after that. Call it a wake-up call. Story 16. Extremely rare type of kidney cancer at age 21. My doctor, who is the head specialist at the renowned Cleveland Clinic, used my case as a study case going forward due to the severeness plus rareness of it. Turning 27 in a week, and am in remission. Story 17. Crashed my e-bike with 30 kilometers per h. I am convinced that the only reason I'm alive, or at least not a vegetable, is because I wore a helmet. Had to lay in a dark room for 2 days because of the concussion, but other than that, I was fine. Story 18. When I was born, I was choking myself with the cord. I also have lactose intolerance, so I couldn't be breastfed. I have ASD and ADHD. Breathing implies an allergy risk for me since I'm allergic to nearly anything which can be inhaled, to the point that I've developed asthma. Not to mention the amount of times that I've hurt myself in pretty serious ways. It's nearly a miracle that I'm alive, functional, and healthy. Story 19. I almost got shocked to death as a kid. When I was 8, my cousin was washing his car at our grandma's house in Pakistan. The hose was connected to a motor that pumped the water. I thought it would be hilarious to prank him by shutting off the water. Anyone who lives in a third world country knows never to be barefoot around electricity and water. I was barefoot and grabbed the handle to shut off the motor. Instantly got glued to the motor from the current as 220 volts went through my body. I started foaming at the mouth. I would have died had my cousin not come in to check on the water. He grabbed me by the legs and pulled me off. I'm sure he got shocked as well. I'm very grateful for him. Story 20. Thought I had a cold sinus infection. Went to the doctor on a whim. I never went to the doctor for anything, and found out that I had very advanced AML leukemia. Doctor said if I did not start treatment immediately, I had less than 6 days to live, and even with treatment, chances of survival were less than 20%. That was 14 years ago. Edit. My brother saved my life with a stem cell transplant, so shout out to the real hero. Story 21. Had a widowmaker heart attack while lying in bed when I was 35, completely out of nowhere. I was in good shape, ate healthy, exercised regularly, no family history of coronary issues. I owe my life to some great EMTs, doctors, and nurses. Story 22. I was backpacking Nepal with my friend in January 2023. One of my top things to do was to take a 30 morning flight from Kathmandu to Pokhara so that I could catch glimpses of all the big mountains and spot a couple of 8,000 peaks. My friend wasn't so keen, somehow got him on board after hyping it up. But he got the whole plan postponed by 2 days at the last minute so that he could get home faster. It was an 11-day plan that we cut short to 9 days. So we flew to Pokhara 2 days before our original date in an ATR 72 plane numbered YT 691. It was one of the most scenic flights I have ever taken. That flight YT 691 plane crashed 2 days later while landing at Pokhara, killing everybody on board. It was the same flight we would have taken had my friend not got the trip postponed by 2 days. Story 23. Jumped into the deep end of the school pool during class despite not knowing how to swim. Panicked. Idiot classmate jumped in right after me, landed on my head shoulder, knocking me about. Took on water, started choking, and panicked even more. Another sensible classmate saw what was going on and immediately dove in and pushed me towards the pool wall so I could grab the ledge. Story 24. In 2003, I was in a major car accident. We drove off the side of the Port Hills in Christchurch, Summit Road, at 90 kilometers. We hit nose first, which made the car flip 12/6 end over end until we eventually landed on the road below, about 50 or 70 meters BM upside down. Lucky thing was that if we slid any further, we would have gone down the next part of the hill, which didn't end until the base of the hill. I remember going unconscious during the roll and seeing the passenger's face get pummeled by broken glass. I woke up after being unconscious and was placed on a gurney and put into the ambulance. I woke up at about 4 a.m. in the hospital. Today I need a lower spinal fusion as assessed after the accident by an orthopedic surgeon. It just seems to continue giving me issues each day. I consider myself luck AF. Story 25. Escaping 3 years of domestic violence and abuse. I'm still working on my recovery, but I'm grateful every day that I'm alive after the final incident nearly took me out completely. Story 26. I was going down to the basement car parking, which had a single entry exit point. I was on a bike and had a friend sitting behind. I told him if I go fast enough down the slope, you will feel weightless, as in a roller coaster. I sped up on the slope, voila, there is a car coming towards us with. I got nervous, couldn't let go of the race, but pressed the clutch all the way. Within milliseconds, how, we passed in between the car and a concrete pillar. We didn't crash. I looked back at my friend, he was as yellow as a banana, said, by God, I saw death. I am never gonna ride with you again. The rush, adrenaline, and the helplessness in that moment I'll never forget. Story 27. One time as a kid, I skidded and crashed my bike really bad right at the top of a blind hill and that trucks and cars go through and sometimes speed for fun. I was panicking and my leg got caught in my bike and everything hurt so much I could see a vehicle. I think it was a truck, but I don't remember anymore approaching, and I tried calling out for help since I was close to home, like less than 20 feet, and all my neighbors were inside. Luckily, despite my dad not hearing me, he heard our dogs going insane as they were tied up outside, and he came out thinking someone was messing with them. I don't 100% think I would have died, but I often wonder what would have happened if my dogs hadn't barked so much. There was also a time I fell out of tree while climbing and winded myself and hurt my back a bit, but was otherwise fine and stood up to realize I had come just a few inches from landing on a board with a large nail sticking up. I was pretty young though, so I just shook off and thought I was lucky. Story 28. This was when I was about 9 years old. I usually ride my bicycle to school since it's so near. My school had 2 entrances, a main one, and a secondary one that not a lot of people use. The second one leads right out onto a main road. At the end of one random school day, I decided to use the school's secondary entrance to go to a 7-Eleven's that's located at a shop lot across the main road. As I was just about to cross the main road, 2 parked school buses flanked the secondary entrance, so it sort of created a blind spot on either side of the gate. I was literally about to blast of the secondary gate onto the main road when my brain went, Hold up, this seems kind of dangerous, stupid. Let's stop and look both ways. I schmidt you not, the moment I stopped, a whole ass bus whooshed at speeds far faster than it should have, literal meters away from my front tire. If I didn't stop right then and there, I'd probably would have died. To this day, I'm very careful whenever it comes to being on using the roads, and I'm especially wary of stupid, dangerous situations. Story 29. About 12 years ago, I went on a date with my best friend's roommate. We found we didn't have a whole lot in common, so we left it at that. I've always been a bit set in my ways, and there were some lifestyle changes I just wasn't going to change to meet her perceptions of an ideal guy. To be honest, she came off as a bit too clingy and demanding. About a week later, she went on a date with another guy, and very quickly, they were exclusive. A couple months after that, they have a falling out and she's devastated. He goes over to her place to get his things, and she had her brother and one of his friends there waiting. They beat him up pretty good, then threw him from the 4th floor balcony. He did survive, but I just think about how close I could have been to being in his shoes. All 3 went to prison. No clue where they are today. Story 30. Lost the trail hiking in the Canadian bush. Alone. No one really aware where I was or when I was coming back. There had been a fire several years back, so parts of the trail were not too clear, but I kept going. Was going to fish at a small lake along the trail. I made it to the lake, caught nothing, and decided to head back. That is when I lost the trail. This was in an area of northwest Ontario where there was basically nothing by bears, moose, and Canadian Shield lakes between you and Hudson Bay. I had no compass, no water, etc. I knew there was a stream that was between me and the main lake I hiked from. I bushwhacked to the direction I thought the stream was, and eventually found it. I then tromped in hip-deep water to find the bridge I crossed on the way to the small lake. I found the bridge. From there, I was able to navigate back to the trailhead. I was 13 and learned a lot about myself that day. I knew if I could figure that out at 13, I could figure just about everything else out. I also vowed I'd never put myself or anyone else in a situation like that ever again. Plan your work and work your plan. Story 31. In my last day, at my last job as an animal keeper, horses, I decided for the last hour to just go to the field and brush some manes, just saying goodbye to my horse friends. It was a really beautiful day, and I was with one of my favorite horses. There were around 30 horses on the field. They probably heard something because all of a sudden all the horses ran in the same direction, so my horse just ran through me. She hit me with her shoulder and threw me on the ground. While I'm pretty sure that at least one other horse jumped over me, I remember closing my eyes and thinking, that was it. Then I looked and all the horses were on the opposite side of the field, and I just rolled under the electric fence because I was scared that they would run towards me again. I remember that I tried to get up and couldn't, and I started crying in shock. I called my colleague and I asked him to pick me up with the golf cart. I had the biggest hematoma, almost as big as my thigh, and it was difficult to walk for a few days. But I was all good. But in the moment, I really thought that I would die. Story 32. As a kid, my stepbrother was drowning in a lake. Swam out to save him. I'm a pretty strong swimmer. Soon as I grabbed him, I realized how bad he was panicking. It was a good few meters before we reached ground that I could touch with my feet above water level. As I swam him and I back to shore, he just kept pushing me under. I'd bounce off the lake floor, springing up for air, as I pushed us both forward while he dunked me back under for his own benefit of staying above water level. Must have been a solid 5 minutes straight of this fight of me gasping for air fighting beneath him. A battle between me, him dunking me constantly, gravity and water to be able to breathe. Sometimes I was unable to spring back up for a gasp of air as he had his hands on the top of my head so he could stay afloat, something that stuck with me since I was a boy. Hats off to those that save people from water who can't swim. How did my dad not see what was going on? Why didn't he jump in to help? What was going on? On shore, that was more important than 2 families' boys struggling against water. Story 33. Heart failure. I have an artificial heart valve. That surgery was in December of last year. Pretty simple, but obviously all heart surgery carries some risk. I had a hemorrhage from that surgery and had to go back under. And while recovering, I went into Vitage and had to be defibrillated. 3 months later, I went into the ER complaining of fever, palpitations, and confusion. They found I had an infection on the valve and it was falling away. Rushed to the Royal Hospital for surgery. I was given a 20% mortality rate. During recovery from that surgery, I suddenly started having severe chest pains, difficulty breathing, and couldn't lie down. A completely different heart valve had failed. I don't remember much because I was on ketamine and fentanyl for the pain, but I was told after it was a coin flip, and my parents were told to prepare for the worst. I wasn't able to consent. We still don't know what caused it. During recovery from that surgery, they found the first valve I had installed was leaking significantly and might become unseated. Surgery the next day. When I asked about mortality, I was told it was same as the first surgery, all of this before 30. I'm still recovering from surgery 5. Story 34. When I was 15, I decided that I had the materials and knowledge to build a muzzle-loading punt gun, a homemade cannon, and fire it. Had I used old-fashioned black powder, the occasion may have gone swimmingly, but I was out of black powder. My father had some smokeless powder in his reloading box, so my 15-year-old brain said, "This'll work." and proceeded to load up with a small handful of powder behind about 4 ounces of pea gravel in a cloth patch. Tried to light a fuse, but the wind was blowing too hard, so I put it in a vise and used a shot shell primer. When the commotion died down, my friend was thrown through the doors on our shed, and my brother was thrown over the doghouse, and I was thrown backwards, tumbling through the yard. When I regained my feet, I couldn't hear, and there was a piece of steel the size of my hand sticking out of my shoulder and 2 pieces of shrapnel in my leg beside my nutsack. I'm so happy it didn't go off before I put it in the vise. We all would have died. It was a closely held secret for many years afterwards. Story 35. Back when I was 14, I was skiing right after we got out for winter break. The chairlift area was slicked off from the rain the night before, so it was solid ice. And if you try to turn your skis on ice, you'll go straight. I went down the hill, and you typically turn your skis sideways when stopping because it causes the most friction. I hit the ice and didn't slow down. The chairlift has giant wooden poles around it with ropes attached to catch anyone from flying into the people getting on the lift. Except these were squared, so when I went to stop, I couldn't and went directly into the pole. I hit the pole head first, but my head was angled just right that it grabbed my cheek first and tore from there to the upper lip of my mouth. The helmet split when I was getting stitched up. I was told I was lucky, and had I been angled just so slightly differently, my brain could have taken serious damage. It's not some crazy car crash story or anything, but when I hear of skiing accidents and the states people get left in after, it makes me realize I really got away with one. Story 36. One time I took penicillin and started having an allergic reaction. My mom, the only person I was with, said it's impossible to be allergic to antibiotics. Within moments, my tongue, eyes, throat, and face, probably everything TBH, started swelling and hives formed. She called 911 and they showed up very fast. They busted 5 veins trying to administer. I'm in the back of the ambulance at this point and my vision is blurry and I feel abnormally calm. Anyways, I tell them that I'm tired and going to take a nap, and they told me to stay awake. I remember wanting to sleep so bad. It wasn't a tired physically or mentally. It was just, I'm so relaxed and calm, let me sleep anyways. Somehow they got a vein to accept, and it saved me enough to get to the ER and finish calming down the reaction. I went from taking the medication with absolutely no reaction to anaphylactic within a pill's difference. At the time, I was also pregnant with my down 10-year-old who has a mild reaction to penicillin. I'm so thankful we are both alive, and I never listened to my mom again. TBH, I should have stopped a long time ago. Story 37. I just took a solo backpacking trip, 6.5 miles up to some alpine lakes, over mud pits and scree fields. With pack, I weigh about 285 pounds. Mud pits soaked my shoes on the way in. On the way out, I couldn't find the path I took the first time through the blueberry bush. Followed a false trail, got pissed, and decided to forage my way through. I was fine till there was suddenly no rock underneath me, and I was suddenly Tony Hawk Pro skating, grinding down a massive blueberry branch. The hole was 2 feet above my head when I stopped and more below me, balancing on a blueberry branch. I couldn't reach my beacon. I had a gun, my voice, and the niggling reminder in the back of my head that my fat ass has never done a pull-up in my life. But I hadn't seen anyone all day on the trail, and I was still about 5 out. No cell signal. Turns out that if you give me a good enough reason, I can absolutely pull 285 pounds straight up by grabbing the blueberry bushes on the other side and hauling up. It was insane. Made it out. Boyfriend doesn't want me solo hiking anymore. Can imagine why. Story 38. When I was 15, my parents took my sister and I on a road trip as we were driving through the Rockies on our way to Surrey, BC. The person in front of us either lost their muffler or drove over one. We were doing 110 kilometers per h, and there was no way my dad could have avoided it or braked in time, so we ended up hitting it and dragged it for about 100 yards before we could come to a complete stop. We all got out, and at first Dad thought it had hit the transmission, but we were greeted by the smell of gasoline. Someone behind us stopped and said we had a guardian angel watching over us that day. All it would have taken is a few sparks from that muffler and we probably wouldn't be here. So after checking everything, my dad told us that the muffler ended up punching a hole the size of softball in the gas tank. The scary thing was, my dad was a firefighter at the time and he ended up being physically sick to his stomach. And I think that worried me more than the fact things could have been a lot worse. Story 39. I was on my way to work when I started to slide all over the road. My driver education kicked in and I started trying to steer out of the skid. Despite my best efforts, off the road I went. I ended up falling down a steep hill and apparently hit a boulder on the way down. The impact triggered my side curtain airbags. If that boulder was positioned a few feet away, chances are I wouldn't be typing this right now. Story 40. Driving to school early one morning, looked at the left side of the road at gas prices, and realized that the cars in the left lane were stopped at a red light. My lane was also red, but I didn't notice till I was going through the intersection. Car came from the right side and got so close I couldn't see their headlights. Somehow made it out without a scratch on me or my car. Man, I miss my Grand Prix. Lots of memories. Story 41. When I was in 7th grade, I was out with my parents running some errands. Suddenly, a parade of what had to be 25 plus police cars sped through the intersection and pulled into an adjacent parking lot. For context, we were driving a Dodge Charger, Sierra 8 Hemi at the time. While sitting at an intersection, a man ran out and got into the back seat of the car in front of us at the light. Don't remember what kind of car exactly, but it was something like an older Toyota Corolla. Turns out this mystery man had just finished committing armed robbery at the grocery store nearby and needed a getaway car. He reached around from the back seat and shot the driver in the head, which caused the victim to accelerate uncontrollably into an ATV dealership, crashing the vehicle. The carjacker then went and hijacked a truck and tried to speed away, but got lit up by what was probably 70 police gunshots. Had the carjacker been using his brain, he would have carjacked the muscle car that was perhaps 5 steps farther away than the original victim. Story 42? When I was a kid, young teen, my friends and I would hang out in the forest down by a small white rapid, and we would sit there in the dark being all cool. The boys would have fun by throwing rocks into the rapids. One time, while we were down there, one of the boys chose to lift this super heavy one, like so big he could barely lift it, and he just barely missed my head as he tried to throw it over me, like the stone grazed the hair on my scalp. It was that close. If that stone was just a millimeter lower, I would have, 1, been knocked out, and 2, I would have fallen into the rapids that night. I always think about how much of a near-death experience that was, because I didn't care at all when it happened, and neither did my friends. Until me and my best friend were talking the week after, and she goes, "Imagine if you fell in?" And I was like, "Yeah, whoa." Story 43. Van, driven by old man, pulled out in front of my motorcycle just as it started to rain, locked up the brakes but still slammed into the back of the van. Face hit the road first, helmet saved my life, as I quite literally would have had my face ripped in half. Didn't have riding gear on, so I slid across the road, ripped my shorts and shirt off, hit the grass beside the road, and tumbled through the muddy, wet grass, eventually landing on my feet. All in all, sustained very minor injuries compared to what could have been. Worst part was showering the mud off of my back at the hospital. Back had very little skin left on it, but they couldn't apply any ointment or wraps until the wounds were clean. Also had to pick out all of the stones from my back, knees, and hands. Wear your riding gear, kids. I promise it sucks if you don't. Story 44. I've been around guns my entire life. One time, in all that time, I did something unsafe. I was in college, but had a small safe. A friend was moving and asked if I could lock up his revolver. He dropped it off, and he left. Before putting it away, I decided to clean it, since I am pretty anal about it, and he wasn't. All clean, I slid bullets into the chambers to make sure they slid in and out smoothly. You can get a powder buildup where the shell and bullet meet, sometimes making them stick, and a normal cleaning routine sometimes doesn't get it. I emptied out the bullets, clocked and pointed it at floor, pulled the trigger, opened it back up, and one bullet had not fallen out. If I had closed the cylinder on that round, I'd have fired a bullet into my floor. Now that I read that it isn't a lucky to be alive story, apologies, but it's where my head went when I was thinking of my own mistakes. Story 45. 10 years ago, I was experiencing pain in my calf and then difficulty breathing. Went to multiple doctors and they treated me for multiple things, but it kept getting worse. Finally, I was home alone with my 3- and 1-year-old daughters, giving them a bath. I went to kneel down, and it felt like something exploded in my heart. All I thought was get them out of the water. Called 911 and was taken to the ER, where they couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. The doctor finally said, "We're going to give you a CT scan, but we don't expect to find anything." Found bilateral P blocking nearly all of my lungs and a DVT in my right leg. Doctors said I should be dead, as what I probably felt when I knelt down was a part of the blood clot that broke free and went to my heart. If it weren't for that, they think the clots in my lungs would have probably killed me in another day or so. Story 46. Got some coke that I guess was laced with fentanyl. I just remember going to the gas station to get some smokes. Just remember feeling really good, then I couldn't walk, was walking in circles, then fell over into a bush. I just remember someone coming up to me like, "Hey, are you all right? Ambulance is on the way." Then I blacked out. I guess I was swinging on the cops and EMTs and then swinging on people at the hospital. Woke up about a week later, completely tied down with tubes down my throat. The first thing that happened was I realized I overdosed. And then I had to schmidt, but was tied down. They were taking the tubes out and I schmidt all over the bed. Not fun. Anyways, the nurse said my oxygen level was crazy low and I had a high chance of having permanent brain damage. Was in the ICU for another week, then regular hospital for like a week. Haven't done drugs since then, at least. Story 47. Went skiing as kid on a really cold night. The surface of the snow was really hard and semi-frozen. Dad suggests a slope that I've never tried before, on a really high slope. It took us a 15-minute chairlift ride to get there, so we were pretty high up. It didn't take long after I started down the slope, when I just kept gaining speed and couldn't turn. I weighed like 100 pounds at the time and couldn't break through the surface, so I was essentially skating along the ice. I flew past my dad, who was a champion skier at the time, and there was a turn coming up. Since I couldn't turn, I just stayed into one of those cheap plastic orange lattice fences you see. I slid under the fence and held onto the post for dear life because the lower half of my body was dangling off the edge of a cliff. Dad was able to ski up to me and pull me out. Story 48. I was 15, and one day, I suddenly got a fever with an excruciating, throbbing headache. It was so bad I could not get out of bed, nor eat or sleep. The next day, I was sent to the hospital, and the doctors could not diagnose what's wrong. I was seen by different specialists, and after so many laboratory tests, I was diagnosed with acute bacterial meningitis asterisk. I spent nearly a month in the hospital for my treatment. Imagine changing IV every 3 days, and getting numerous injections daily for weeks was a nightmare. I kid you not. The pain was a solid 10 tenths from my head down to my spine. I'm 25 now, and still, nothing compares to that pain. The doctors told me that I was lucky because if I was sent to the hospital later than I did, I could have suffered one seizure that could instantly take my life away. Guess it wasn't really my time yet. Blessed and grateful to be alive today. Story 49. I was almost George Floyded when a psych tech decided that I was his route to getting a 3-day fishing weekend via workman's comp. He had a habit of restraining patients in order to claim injury and get paid days off. I was a scrawny, passive kid, so apparently I was the perfect target. Thoracic asphyxiation. The only reason I survived was my body responded by puking, which disgusted him just enough for me to get some temporary breathing room. I almost died while like 6 staff, 3 of them nurses, watched. I was told about the workman's comp scam the next day by a staff member who wasn't the brightest, but sweet enough that he thought it would cheer me up to know I hadn't actually hurt the guy. I'd been almost murdered, plus stabbed with a huge dose of antipsychotics for my trouble too. So I spent the next day in bed traumatized and suicidal, shivering from drug-induced Parkinson's. I hope the guy was hurting. Story 50. While out for a bike ride, I slowed down to ask a guy changing a flat if he was okay. He said he was okay, and thanked me for checking on him. By me doing so, I figured I might have added 10 seconds to my ride. A few minutes later, I'm coming up to a road crossing, and while descending down a hill, I see a car pull out of an intersection, striking another car that's traveling down the 2-lane highway. The vehicle that was struck left the road, traveled up an embankment, and landed exactly where I would have been waiting to cross the road. If that random guy hadn't had a flat tire, it would have been a closed casket ending for me. The guy who was in the car got out and almost schmidt himself when he realized how close he came to landing on me. I thought I used up all my lives years ago, but here I am. Story 51. 10 years of cocaine abuse, all kinds of crazy schmidt happened. There was this time I got a hooker. I used to get hookers just to have company. One night, and we were getting into a dangerous neighborhood to get more cocaine, and the guy was bringing JT to us, and right on the corner of the stret, we hear boom. Someone slammed their car into a friggin' wall, and out of nowhere the police showed up, and she screamed to me, go, mother ducker, go and you turn to somewhere else. And yeah, that was scary. I think this was the same night I went back home, and there was a heavy rain, and I had to pee really bad, and I was in my room that was upstairs, and I didn't want to wake anyone up. So just peed from my window. It was raining, so I think it was okay. I might have had too much that night. Anyway, 12 years clean now. Story 52. My mother took me to a circus when I was 4. They take me backstage where I escape and run into the elephant compound. There's a mother elephant and a baby in chains while I am running around the elephant's legs. People start screaming, which upsets the mother elephant, and the handlers can't get near the compound as the mother starts getting aggressive. The handlers have to clear everyone out of the back lot as my mom tries to coax me away from the baby elephant. I lived. Story 53. I was driving to a friend's house in the next county over, but there was massive traffic on the interstate, so I decided to take a back road I was vaguely familiar with. I made a wrong turn and wound up on a road that had a really sharp bend to the left with no guardrails or anything, and a pretty steep drop down. It was beginning to rain and the oil was lifting off the roads, and my tires weren't in great shape either. I had my best friend and toddler son in the car too, so I'm coming down this road and come up on the bend, which came on kind of suddenly, at least it felt that way, and I hit my brakes, old car no abs, and between the rain, oil, poor vehicular maintenance, and my inattentiveness, I stopped just short of flying off the end of the straight shot. Thank God I knew to pump the brakes or we would have. Story 54. I got pneumonia with a pleural effusion. I felt 100% fine, except the pleural effusion was the most pain I've ever felt in my life. Being stupid, I just kind of dealt with it for about 3 weeks. It got bigger, and the pain became so unbearable that I finally was like, sure, I'll go to the hospital. Turns out my entire right lung was filled with fluid, and the pneumonia had started to spread to my left lung. Again, I felt fine except for the pain. They gave me a shot of morphine straight up for the pain, and I was like, cool, I feel good. I'll go home now. The ER doctor was like, if you go home, you will die. I was admitted and spent 5 days in the hospital. They debated putting me on a ventilator. Apparently, your blood oxygen level is supposed to be like 96% plus mine was 68%. I felt fine, but yeah, apparently I was super close to death. Story 55. My father and I climbed a mountain once with some of his friends that was very steep and all rock climbing. We didn't have ropes or anything to save our lives in case we fell. I was 10 at the time, and I'm not sure why my father thought it was a good idea. 3/4 of the way, I ended up slipping on some loose rocks and fell. I remember being sure that I was going to die. That was it. That moment in free fall seemed to last forever. A buddy of my father's immediately put his hand up, and I landed in his hand, balancing on his outstretched arm. Not sure how he was able to do it while scaling a cliff, but I owe my life to that man, and I don't even remember what he looks like or even his name. I remember my father laughed it off when we got to the top. It was the scariest moment of my life. Story 56. I was walking down the street in Soho, New York City, in 1994, when I heard glass breaking, and looking up, I saw a picture window 6 floors up had been smashed from the inside by something, and the larger pieces were falling slower because of wind resistance, but the smaller pieces were beginning to shower me. I jumped out into the street, luckily no cars going by, and a literal second or two later, a dumpster-sized pile of broken plate glass was heaped where I'd been. What was especially odd was my wife was at that time dying of cancer, and we had a 10-year-old. But I went home and didn't mention it to either of them. They didn't need to think about my mortality. But the next morning, I called an ex-girlfriend to tell her, and she said, "Well, I'm happy you're alive," and I realized how much I needed to hear someone say that. Story 57. Didn't know at the time, but a group of no-gooders show up to a party my cousin and I hosted. No clue who they were, and eventually was told one of my so-called friends invited them. They hung out in lawn chairs on the lawn and left maybe 20 minutes later, right before me and some friends were going to make them leave. They just gave me this uneasy feeling. Fast forward 20 years, and a buddy did my floors in my home before I sold it. Asked if I remembered the party and those 3 Mexican dudes. Long story short, he knew then and told them my cousin and I were family and kindly asked they not rob us. They had a car full of buddies down the road waiting for their call. They were going to rob us blind, possibly more. Found out 2 of them are in prison now for murder just a few weeks after I had that party. Story 58. A friend and I were chased by a panther when I was 12. It was down a pretty steep hill filled with briar patches. When we saw it, it noticed us and we took off running. We made it to my house and got inside with quite a few seconds to spare. But it was still absolutely terrifying to see it on the road just walking away. No one believed us when I called my parents and told them to be careful when they got home. And I'm just happy it had went on somewhere else when they finally did make it home. I was suicidal when I was 16 and jumped headfirst off a 20-foot bridge. I ended up landing on my side and only had severe bruising in places I could hide. Luckily, I didn't try again after that and managed to pull myself out of it eventually. Really should have told my mom so I could have received therapy. Story 59. I've shared this before on Reddit, but I'll share it again. 15 years old when I was ran over and dragged by a car. I was crossing the street in front of my house and looked both ways. Put my left foot in the road, then everything went black. Next thing I know, I'm standing in the middle of the road, my binder laying on the road about 20 feet away. The guy dragged me a good 25 to 30 feet from where he hit me. Somehow only managed to get a completely shattered left ankle, some cuts on my elbow, and tire marks up my left leg all the way to my knee. Had surgery to replace my ankle with titanium plates and screws. My hip locks into place sometimes when I squat or sit cross-legged. My left foot is now permanently half a shoe size, USA, smaller than my right. It's been 16 years and it's still pretty horrific to think about. Story 60. I hit a jump on my dirt bike going a bit too fast, and I got up a lot higher than I planned on in midair. I was thinking I'm not gonna be able to land this, I'm gonna die. Landed it and crashed. But I landed just right when I didn't get seriously injured, just bruised up a bit. The amount of air I got probably could have killed me, but I landed and crashed just right. Life was flashing before my eyes. Story 61. When I was younger, maybe around 7, we went to the beach in South Carolina. I was told it was time to go, and when I started making my way back to land, I kept moving. But I never got any closer. It was like I was jogging in place. I was starting to become exhausted, realizing I wasn't going anywhere. I started going sideways. Fairly certain I was caught right on the edge of a riptide and inadvertently did the exact right thing. Go sideways. Story 62. Got drunk with some buddies in a bar. Like totally Schmidt-faced. We left the bar, and as we walked to the train station, we came upon a construction site where a new building was going up. At the time, the site was just really a big hole in the ground 20 or 30 feet deep. The site was surrounded by a flimsy fence. At the time, for some reason, my buddies and I thought it would be a great idea to get into the construction site and look into that big hole. We were mesmerized. And that's just what we did. You can imagine what happened next. Yes, got too close to the edge and tumbled down. Separated both shoulders, busted 3 ribs, and broke my clavicle. Had to be carried out by the fire department. The only good thing is, I spent the next month on my couch, hopped up on OxyContin. Best feeling ever. Story 63. I do a ton of backcountry mountain bike riding and racing, sometimes literally hours off the grid with no cell service and by myself with just a GPS tracker. But in December last year, I woke up on a Saturday morning with excruciating pain in my stomach. After barely getting to the emergency room, they found out half my large intestine, where it connects to my small was not attached to my abdominal wall and flipped in my sleep, causing all the blood vessels to kink and cut off circulation to the large intestine. I had about an hour before the organ dies. and my small intestine would be dumping waste into my abdomen. The fact that I wasn't in the middle of nowhere somewhere and was able to get medical attention in a timely manner makes me really grateful to be alive and has given me a sense of belief in God or something. Story 64. I was working as a cop in a rural area. Got a call about a huge oak tree that had fallen on a house. Drove out there and fire was already on site. I parked in front of the house and waited a bit. Fire guys were doing their hero stuff and there wasn't any need for me. Big lotto night, so I drove about 10 minutes away to get a ticket. After getting it, I got a call to come back to the house to help transport the homeowners back to a hotel. I thought it was weird because their cars and stuff were fine. Drove back up and couldn't find where I had parked before. Figured I was just confused on the property. Finally oriented myself and realized the other half of the tree had come down right where I had been sitting in my car. Would have been crushed for sure. Story 65. I got on a plane on the morning of 9/11's destination Baltimore from Hartford. It landed at 7:30 a.m., so too early maybe. Plane probably too small also. It was the size of the ones Southwest uses, or used. Landed, went to a hotel to meet co-workers and couldn't make heads or tails out of what they were showing on the TV behind this weird little bar in the hotel lobby. Supposed to fly home same day at 5. Ended up on Amtrak the next day and went through NYC where you could see smoking ruins in the distance. Had a weirdly good time in a packed hotel restaurant full of stuck co-workers. Company picked up the tab for everything. Bunked up with a Canadian co-worker who had a reservation. Woke up the next day to a news story on TV about people who decided to jump where they showed a photo of someone falling. Story 66. 1. When I was an infant, I swallowed my tongue after hernia surgery. No one noticed until I was blue and not breathing. 2. I was T-boned to my car by a guy go 120 kph and I walked away from it. Driver's seat was the only intact place inside the car. I remember hearing a voice say, "It's not your time, go back." 3. I had a widowmaker heart attack at 55 and the ER doctor sent me home telling me it's not a heart attack. Went back to the same ER8 HRS later and was immediately admitted. Several DRS and nurses said I should never have been sent home and that I was extremely lucky that I didn't die at home. Was told that odds of me winning the largest mega lottery were far greater than me surviving the night after I was sent home. Story 67. Went to a party when I was 18. I think I ate around 5, 6 Xanax bars and drank an unknown amount of alcohol. Was having a good time from what I can remember. I passed out, standing up outside and cracked my head open on the concrete. Luckily, 2 of my friends were right next to me at the time and they dragged my bloody corpse to the ER. Had to get 7 staples. I was apparently still somewhat coherent. I don't remember Schmidt. The highlight of the story emo is when I got my head stapled. My friends told me the doctor snapped his fingers in my face and then turned to someone and said, "He doesn't need to be sedated." After I got 7 staples in my head, apparently I looked at the stapling apparatus and then up at the doctor and said, "Are you going to staple my head?" Story 68. Traveling up north to move during February, pulling a U-Haul behind my car and going around a bend in the road in a town. Heavy traffic. There's a red light and traffic stopping as I make the bend. I try to stop, but because it's still winter, road is slick. Car and U-Haul jackknife and just go sliding towards the stopped cars ahead. I sort of blacked out a second from panic and then some unknown instinct took over, and instead of continuing to try and turn the wheel and brake, I just let go of both. My car and the U-Haul corrected right away. I pressed the brakes and grabbed the wheel gently and let go, and retried when it felt it was starting to pull. Safely got my car stopped within my lane and without striking anyone. 7 seconds of chaos. Should be my new band name. Story 69. Having RSV diagnosed as allergies for my first several months of being born nearly killed me. Had it not been for my mother's consistent pushing of the doctors, I'm probably not here. She kept the reports too, and recently found them. Also, hemorrhaging in the middle of the night post-tonsillectomy at age 19. I was throwing up blood for hours and hours before I was ambulances to another hospital and taken back into surgery. Story 70. Here's a genuinely thought I was dying story. It was 7th grade and I just got done with gym. Whilst waiting in the halls for the bell to ring, my heart was beating extremely fast for no reason. I wasn't doing anything but standing. I didn't want to go to the nurse, because it was the start of the week before finals. So I walked to the stairway upstairs into my 9th period. I sat down, trying to collect myself. I thought this was a heart attack, so I just basically stood there and accepted my fate. Then it stopped and I failed my Italian test. Surprisingly, I wasn't that scared of dying, even though I cry at the thought constantly, leaving my dogs and cat alone. Went to the doctor for it and just found out I had an irregular heartbeat. Fun story for me to tell. Story 71. Car accident when I was 16, sitting in the front passenger seat when my friend decided to show off. We were going 85 on a 25 miles per hour road when he lost control. I remember so clearly seeing the telephone pole coming straight at me. I apologized to my family in my head. We hit some sand or something at the last millisecond and I watched the pole go right by my window as we went airborne. We hit a tree and barreled down into the woods in pitch black. It was so loud as we bashed through branches and bushes and I remember just waiting for impact from a tree, but it never came. When the car stopped finally, My friends in the back were severely injured. One was having a seizure from a TBI. I walked away unscathed but didn't sleep for weeks. Story 72. Almost died in an id I won in Soul Crush 2022. I passed out for a few minutes due to loss of oxygen, and I guess also because I was scared as hell for my life. My friend, now girlfriend, which I went to a club with, also fainted due to the pressure of people and had a broken rib. I will never forget being next to her laying in the ground waiting for the paramedics while her mom was calling and crying in her phone and me not being able to explain anything because I didn't speak Russian, while also having my parents crying in my phone. News spreaded quick, so everyone in the world knew what was happening in just some minutes after it. We both were taken to the ER after that. People from my university died that day. Story 73. I was diagnosed with a TE and had petechia all over my body. When I got to the ER, the doctor told me my blood platelets were almost at zero. I then stayed at a children's hospital to get it monitored for about a week. I was 18 at the time and needed to get a bone marrow transplant. It's a chronic disease, so I still have some issues today. That was around a decade ago. I haven't had health insurance since then, unfortunately, so I've just been rolling the dice. Story 74. I vividly remember it. But when I was around 7 or 8, my dad was driving towards a bridge. This car came zooming past and was driving in the middle of both lanes. My dad made a last-minute halt, and our car ended up swerving into a bush, which saved us from tumbling down a cliff. Some people who were passing by managed to tow the car out while my sister and I escaped from the back. The bush is what saved us. Story 75. Had an abscessed tooth my freshman year of high school, hurt a little bit, got home from school, took a nap, and woke up 3 hours later with the right side of my face completely swollen. Went to the ear and was committed for the night on some heavy IV antibiotics. The next morning I woke up and it had gotten worse. The doctor who was caring for me said we would have to pull the tooth as the infection was spreading to my eye and said it would spread to my brain if they didn't do it. Turns out it was a very rare bacterial infection that would only go away with a certain antibiotic, which they wouldn't have known unless they pulled the tooth to get a culture of the bacteria. Story 76. Trying to find Mexican food in South Africa, my wife and I got off on the wrong street and had to walk. We were followed by a group of guys who split to cut us off. Someone saw and went the wrong way down a one-way street, revved his engine and ran through them. They ran and he was threatening more than trying. He pulled up and told us what was happening, and we hopped in his car and he took us home. The likelihood of rape and murder was extremely high. Rape of my wife, almost 100%, and murder probably less, but still very high. That guy will always be our savior, and I don't know if he realizes how grateful I am. This was 20 years ago this year. Story 77. I almost drowned in 2021 when I was snorkeling in the sea. I was in a group of maybe 12 or so people, and I was the one who swam the furthest out. Ended up getting caught in some big waves and had my mask blown off. Struggled to breathe between the waves as they kept coming at me very quickly. I started panicking and for some reason tried to remove my swim fins, but I was unable to remove the straps. Looking back, my inability to remove my fins is the only reason I was able to stay afloat and make it back to the boat we jumped off from. Always respect the sea and water in general. Mother Nature is always stronger than you. Story 78. When I was a teenager, I was driving to work and came across my friends at a red light. With no one ahead of us, we decided to use the opportunity to race each other. The next light about a half mile up was green, so we continued full speed ahead. Then, a car turning left decided to pull out in front of me. I don't know how I missed them, and I don't know how fast I was going at the time. All I know is there'd be a small chance of survival if I would have hit them. I was so shaken up, I was crying when my friends called to see if I was okay. That was the last time I tried to race anyone. Story 79. In July 2005, 3 other contractors and I were driving low profile in Baghdad. We had an unarmored 98 Mercedes SUV with tinted windows, so we kind of fit in with the local traffic. We also had on our Haji suits and were pretty well armed. Now the Karada area has a lot of roundabouts, so it's pretty easy to keep moving. But this day there was a traffic jam and we decided to take a side street. Bad decision. Somehow we ended up in the middle of a Shia political parade. They were actually slaping the fenders of the SUV as they passed by. I could see my burning body hanging from a bridge, but they didn't notice us, and we made it back to the green zone without incident. Story 80. Went out on a river in a 2-person metal boat with 4 people. Go about 25 miles downriver and get caught in a lightning storm. We are all in the water with thunder rumbling around us. The boat is filling up with water rapidly. We make the call to go back. On the way back, lightning is striking the water in front of us and the trees around us. The boat was barely staying afloat. The lighting was so intense, we could feel the air shake before it even hit. I know it might sound dramatic, but it felt like what I assume sitting in a foxhole with artillery dropping all around you and hoping you don't get hit. I live in Florida. Story 81. Alcohol poisoning. Dumbass college kid. Friends had a double ice loge at their college party. I brought a bottle of MD-20. 20 just to be funny. Another friend challenged me, and not to be outdone, I told him to grab the MD. I lunged the entire bottle. Mind you, this was after drinking about 5 vodka Red Bulls. Woke up the next morning in the hospital. Apparently, I was puking everywhere and then went unresponsive. My parents drove 2 hours to the hospital, and the docs told them there was a chance I wouldn't wake up. I woke up still drunk and was hitting on my sister's friend who was there with her. I learned a valuable lesson that day and haven't been stupid like that since. Story 82. Got a few. Overdose once. Blacked out behind the wheel a few times somehow to wake up parked somewhere. My guardian angel was there. Friends joy riding overturned a bit. Almost drove us right off the cliff of a mountain. Abscess tooth infection almost killed me. Had lived in gang territory when I was young till 16 years old. And craziest one, I was mistaken for a murderer. Walking down the street, and 4 cop cars sped up right to me, all whipped their loaded guns at me and yelled, "Let me see your hands, mother ducker." Yeah, that's scary. Eventually got a look at my ID, seen they had the wrong guy. I would have done one wrong move, I'd have like 50 rounds in me. That's just some of mine. Story 83. I was born with pulmonary valvular stenosis. The opening in my pulmonary heart valve was too narrow. The condition would have killed me by the time I was 1 year old, so I had open heart surgery at 2 months old. If I had been born 5 years earlier, there would have been no surgery available. As it was, I had something like a 60% odds of survival. Fun fact. Now they do the same surgery on infants venoscopically through a vein. Story 84. I was in the military, wicked depressed. I had full access to every weapon on the ship, not a good mix. I had made plans. One day we had a gun shoot training event, and I had a full-on breakdown. My chief sent me to the med bay immediately, and there I had to fully confront all of my feelings and was sobbing when they asked me if I had thoughts of hurting myself. Got me the help I needed, and I got out of the military alive. Not sure if he fully knows it, but if the off chance he were to ever read this, Chief Godoy, you saved my life. Story 85. When I was in 2nd grade or year 3 in the English curriculum, I sort of hung on to a 2-meter tall wooden locker and it's starting falling. It felt like time slowed down and I managed to lift my head so it doesn't hit the ground, and I put my legs and feet up to hold up the locker. My friend's mom was there and managed to lift it a bit so I can get out. The school called an ambulance because they thought I broke my neck. My only injury was a little swollen bump on my forehead along with a mild concussion that I didn't even knew I had until a doctor saw me. Story 86. When I used heroin living in a trailer with my addicted mom and her BF. The BF stuck a propane furnace heater in the room I was in while I was noodled off sleeping, high on heroin. I vaguely remember waking up in a blur from a dead heroin sleep, and for some reason, turned the heater off, and on the last turn of the propane tank to get it off, fell face first on the ground. I woke up maybe an hour or 2 later, wondering what happened. I asked the BF what that was for, and he just said he was sorry he forgot. But the guy wasn't fond of me, so I knew the intention. Story 87. Working in a bakery. We had recently deep cleaned, so everything was unplugged. I leaned over a metal table to plug the big floor mount mixer back in, turned to say something to someone, and didn't notice my fingers on the prongs. It was one of those higher voltage outlets like you would plug a washer or dryer into, and because I has my other hand on a metal table, the electricity went straight across my body, through my lungs and my heart. The ear doctor said that it was a miracle. It didn't kill me. And even more so that I didn't have any additional injuries or complications, well, no major ones at least. Story 88. I survived a drunk driver T-boning my vehicle in speed of excessive 110 miles per hour, ejecting me out of my car flying 75 feet and knocking a street sign out of the ground. I was wearing my seatbelt. Injuries. Left fibia and tibia 4 breaks, right fibia and tibia 6 breaks, left femur shattered requiring plate and screws, right femur compound fracture, requiring prosthetic titanium rod inserted with screws L1, L2, L3, L4, broken C5, C7, broken compound fracture right clavicle, requiring bone graft plate and screws removal of spleen and gallbladder. TB. I have somewhere in the neighborhood of 31 inches of scars from operations and limited mobility in my right arm. Story 89. Got my wisdom teeth removed when I was in my teens. Major migraine headaches because they were impacted. Anesthesia went well enough outside of a wicked sore jaw due to overstretching and the obvious teeth extractions. The doc had prescribed Vicodin for the duration of the healing time. I took it as prescribed. 2 days into healing, I was extremely lethargic, had trouble breathing, dizzy. Mom came home from work to check on me and immediately noticed something was wrong. I was oding due to being underweight and unable to eat substantial food to buffer the medication. If she hadn't come home to check on me, I may have stopped breathing or worse. Story 90. I am a straight man, and many years ago was hanging out at an alternative club where people from all walks of life hung out. Got introduced to some friends of a girl I was with who were gay men. Pretty sure one of them roofied my drink. And subsequently, I drove my car off the side of the road and woke up the next morning in a cow pasture on the outskirts of town. having jumped a ditch and sideswiped a tree, totaling my car. My memory blacked out right after my second drink of the night, which the new friends gave me. Walked away without a scratch or traffic citation. Story 91. Genuinely believe alcohol is arguably the worst drug, at least when you take into account its place in society. 2 years, 3/4 of a bottle of hard liquor a day. Then I tried to quit cold turkey. Well, my family got involved and forced me to do it cold turkey, I guess, because nobody but me knew that would go poorly. Glad I quit, but cold turkey was the wrong choice. 2 seizures and a couple hospital visits later, I'm just over a year sober. I still smoke the devil's lettuce and vape, though, so I still have work to do. Story 92. This was 10 years ago, and I was really tired, but had to go pick up my mom, who was 2 hours away. I took a nap first, but I'm not sure how much it helped. I was dosing in and out, and I recall hitting gravel for a little bit and recovering, but I don't recall much from that drive, but I know I made it there, and then she drove the way back. Every once in a while I have an existential crisis, wondering if I actually survived that drive. I'm a huge advocate against driving tired now, though, obviously. I hate long drives and will alternate if I need to. Story 93, last Thanksgiving. The day after I was doing some light stretches before we went to the in-laws' house for some leftover lunch. I was also in my 3rd trimester. Finishing up, I got a thunderclap headache, vertigo, vomiting, and laid down to sleep because I couldn't keep my eyes open and all the light was causing my head to throb. Woke up in ICU 2 days later with a non-aneurysmal subarachnoid hemorrhage. Could have had a stroke in my sleep and died, or not all there forever. Turns out hormones from pregnancy can cause a little thing called RCVs, even though it normally happens during or not long after childbirth. Story 94. I honestly am shocked I have not committed suicide. I struggled with depression for 20 years and I have PMDD with suicidal ideation. I'm no longer really thinking about that. I've learned to enjoy my life and am happier. And my PMDD is controlled well by medication now. It's like the clouds just parted one day and I actually like being alive even if it's extremely painful at times. I have chronic pain and illness. I guess I'm shocked because I don't feel like I had any control over it or my mind before. It can take me where it wants to, anytime. It freaks me out a bit. Story 95. I got a flat tire on the highway doing 75 miles per hour and rolled the F-250 with a 10K pound dump trailer on the back by slowing down to pull over. The trailer fishtailed on me on the elevated incline in the median while veering towards the turnaround spot on the highway. The whole passenger side of the truck was literally caved in, and I basically did a 180 when it literally flipped upside down, all because of a damn flat tire. All the first responders were shocked that I only had a minor scratch from the window glass from crawling out. I'm lucky to be alive, everyone told me. Story 96. Pulled onto a dark cobblestone street downtown with no streetlights. Was texting my GF that I was on my way home after dropping off a friend at his apartment when a pole from a construction fence came through my front window, through the hole in my steering wheel, and through my left armpit, and pierced into several inches of my driver's seat. I reversed out, pulled my vehicle onto the side of the road into a parking lot, and called my GF to come pick me up. I think about how close that bent, broken fence pole came inches from impaling me pretty often. Don't text and drive. Story 97. Emergency C-section, placenta abrupta stage 3, for those in the know. It was close even though I was already in hospital and wheeled straight to the OR. I'd gone to the ER a few hours prior with a small bit of clear blood showing up. My midwife, praise the goddess for her, had told me to go if I spotted bright red blood, because in 1% of cases it's an emergency. It was an emergency. Me and my daughter are here, almost 6 years later, even though we lost lots of blood and she had an initial APGAR of 2, then 6 a few minutes later. Story 98. I was riding my bike after skipping school one day. I happened to ride past the bus dropping kids off for school. I thought I would sarcastically wave at them after some of them were probably wondering why I didn't show up. During my wave, I lost balance and fell off of the sidewalk and laid out close to the road. The bus wheel was inches within my head. No helmet. I felt the breeze strongly and audibly heard the wheel meeting asphalt full speed. I got up and kept on riding and didn't realize until later I had almost got my head squashed like a watermelon. Story 99. Went on a river canoeing trip with classmates in college. It was supposed to be a really easy trip, but the river rose unexpectedly overnight due to snowmelt, and our campsite was about to get flooded out, so we hurried into the canoes in the morning. All that extra water made eddies in the river, which I wasn't a good enough boater to dodge. Capsized into ice-cold water. Hypothermia right away. I got rescued and warmed back up with the help of classmates and a big warm dog. My only memory between going into the water and being back on campus is the dog. Story 100. When I was roughly 3, I was visiting my aunt at her APT complex. Turned out my aunt was less than a responsible adult at the time. She took me down to the APT communal pool and I went for a swim, headed for the deep end. I lost my grip and began to struggle to float. I flailed and panicked. I eventually gripped the edge of the pool and pulled myself up. I was half expecting the pool goers to be in a panic that a kid almost drowned, but no, not a single soul noticed, not even my aunt. Story 101. I was stabbed, flayed, set on fire, waterboarder 5 times, had my crotch burned with a blowtorch, beat up more times than I can count, choked more time than I can count, poisoned, pushed off a mountain 4 times, pushed off a cliff 1 time, taste. I have holes in my eardrums. Was almost driven over by a bus, drowned. I was blind 2 times, sexually assaulted too many times, 58 suicide attempts, almost had my eye gouged out, and I was clinically dead for 1 minute and 34 seconds. I'm 16. All of this happened since I was 7. Story 102. Quit drinking a liter of whiskey a day cold turkey. Had delirium tremens for like 8 hours. Voices in my head shake so bad, gasping for air. I opened a Bible, and that kept my attention for several hours. If I hadn't focused on the Bible, I don't think I would have lived. A couple of weeks later, I found a scripture. The Word of God is like a fountain of life and will protect you when your life is in danger. Story 103. I took the train to work for years. After a while, you get used to the pattern of express and local trains. One morning, I heard the choo-choo. Although my headphones were on full blast, thought it was my local coming to a stop. So I casually walked across the tracks, then felt a whoosh pull me from behind. It was the express blasting past me just as I finished crossing. Everyone at the station was waving their hands and screaming at me to look out, but I did not hear them, saved by a lucky few inches. Story 104. I was the passenger in a car accident a few months back, where we went through a fence, a barricade, and flew off a bank hill about 30 feet out into a lake, while not wearing a seatbelt. Everyone in the car got out completely unscathed except me, who still escaped with just a broken finger, a lot of scrapes and bruises, and 13 stitches from a laceration that went clear through my chin, lip. None of the hospital or ambulance staff understood how all of us got so lucky. Story 105. Drove to Cali from Arizona on the 8. Fell asleep at the wheel, woke up in a panic on the shoulder of the road, sweeved left and right, and ended up going down into a sandy ditch. Anyone who knows this route knows that the 8 is filled with boulders and cliffs with nothing but rock. I just happened to land safely in a sandy spot with no rocks or anything. Had I fell asleep a moment sooner or later, I would likely be dead. Car was basically totaled, but insurance still decided to repair it for $20K. Story 106. This may be too rural a story, but when I was 12, I was visiting some friend who owned a farm, and we decided to climb up the outside of an old wooden silo. It was belted together with old, rusty iron dowels. Not sure how else to describe them. Well, about 20 feet up, I lost grip and plummeted down, landing on my back on the dirt instead of the cement pad that the silo was standing on. Hurt like hell. Wouldn't confess to my parents, and my back is still mildly ducked up, but I didn't die. Story 107. Standard day operating heavy machinery, and coworker Brad needed a break from the machine. He took it out of gear without telling me as we were still working, so I thought he just put the handbrake on, like we always did. As soon as I disengaged the handbrake, the machine started rolling downhill backwards, and I had no control over the foot brakes since it was out of gear, ending up narrowly missing a tree branch that would have impaled me in the cabin. My fault for not checking the gear before taking the handbrake off. Story 108. Just landed an airplane with my instructor, and we see down at the other end of the runway was another plane. We radio to him asking what the hell he is doing, but he doesn't respond. Then he starts coming straight towards us, and it becomes very apparent that he's speeding up. We can't exit the runway, so we get to watch in horror as this plane narrowly pulls up just in front of us. I guess it was some old WW2 Navy plane, as I could literally read the Navy painted on the underside of the wing. Story 109. Went to the doctor in March for recurrent headaches. MRI found a 49 mm roughly spherical tumor on top of my spinal cord. The most likely explanation was a glioblastoma. Waited on the results of test after test for months while my body deteriorated, knowing if they came up positive I had maybe a few months to a year to live. Thankfully, all tests were negative for cancer, and the tumor was grade 1 with the majority of it being removed. I'm still recovering, but for a while it felt like I kept winning the lottery over and over. Story 110. Not sure if I would have died, but it was late and I was coming home after work. Got to the left, turn lane of an intersection behind a truck. Light turns green and truck and me go. When I got in the intersection, a car from my left came zooming by between me and the truck. The car was, and still is, a blur to me with how fast it was going. I do wonder that if I was a bit faster and the car hit my driver's side door, if I would have survived that impact. Story 111. Car crash. It was nighttime, and my dad and I were headed to get some snacks. It happened at the intersection you'd leave from your house street every day for years, and the light was green, but my dad just paused, longer than usual. There was no one on all 3 sides. And right as my dad was pressing the gas to make that left turn, a small gray, sports-like car zoomed by at what felt like 80 to 90 miles per hour in a 35-40 mile zone. My dad and I just looked at each other and drove home. Story 112. Got a couple, passed out driving, T-boned a pretty sturdy SUV, got pulled out of my back seat, Engine was annihilated, and my engine block was where I would have been had my seat not slid into the back. Whole thing was surreal, and I'm still missing 8 or 9 miles worth of memory. Almost got headshot by a bunch of idiots engaged in a random, sporadic pop gun fight just walking across the street, few inches away from my left ear. Almost got literally blown off the Hoover Dam by the wind. That was fun. Story 113. I flipped my car 7 times, landed on my side. Driver's side wedged into the crevasse of a hillside, but also 5 inches from a water tower. EMs measured it. Was freed by the jaws of life, airlifted to a hospital, woke up there 1 day later, only incurred a fractured pelvis, concussion to the medulla, slight lower spine fracture, and a body so bruised on the left side that it looked like the Walking Dead. Anyone that saw the car afterwards would assume its passenger was dead. No idea how I lived through that. Story 114. Slept on the wheel while driving at 80 miles per hour. Hit a parked car on the highway in the mountains, which sent the parked car 35 feet, and my car spun a complete 180. If I hadn't hit that car, I would have fallen from the mountain about a couple hundreds of feet and get crushed from the impact on the rocks below. I visited the crash site 2 years since it happened, and I still get lightheaded seeing what could have been if the car wasn't parked there. I haven't driven any long distances since. Story 115. Rear-ended someone on the highway going about 65 miles per hour. There was already a single car accident beforehand. Cops were putting out flares and had their lights on. I was stupid and gawking at what was happening. Next thing I know, traffic comes to a complete stop, and I smashed into another car. I wasn't wearing a seatbelt, like an absolute idiot. If both airbags hadn't gone off, I probably would have shot right through the windshield as my car came to an almost dead stop. Both of us walked away without a scratch, luckily. Story 116. Driving at a summer camp, I ran with the other camp director. When we got in, he truck, it was nice and sunny. 200 feet later, there was freak storm, and a tree crushed the truck. I cracked, little baby crack, not a big deal. My skull and tore a neck muscle. The guy driving had to wear a collar for a few weeks. It landed basically behind our heads. 6 inches north and we'd be dead by the time we got out of the truck. It was sunny again. Story 117. When I was a child in about 2nd grade, I choked on a Reese's Puff before school. I was choking for about 2 minutes. My mom tried the Heimlich to no avail and dropped me to the floor to go call 911 as I sat on my hands and knees. My little brother, maybe 6 or 7, punched me in the back as hard as he could out of sheer panic and dislodged it. Were it not for him, I may just be dead. I still went to school. Story 118. I forgot to drink water while doing ecstasy one time. I was lying in my bed after the trip, realizing I was basically dying. I had very little brain activity and had a thought maybe once every 5-7 minutes. It was really weird to realize if I die right now, literally nothing around me changes. Life goes on, and the objects in my room will not move until someone finds me. Then, miraculously, I got a burst of energy and got up and drank more water than I probably should have. Story 119. Flying in northern Alberta, close to Northwest Territories, on an 8-seater. Heard a huge popping sound and felt it on takeoff. About 15 minutes later, a pilot comes to talk to the 7 of us and tell us we lost a tire and we'll have emergency vehicles ready for us when we landed in Edmonton. Texted my mom and GF on approach thinking I was going to possibly die. Landed rough but smoothly enough to keep the plane intact. Thanked the young pilots for saving us that day with their skills.